So hello, welcome. It is me, Martin Anderson, with you for another week of Headlocks and Headphones. This week, of course, has been focused heavily around The Undertaker. Survivor Series coming up on Sunday. We're going to do a preview of that show. We're not going to do a retrospective of The Undertaker's career. Everybody's doing that. Everybody knows kind of what Undertaker's done in his career, and we don't want to sit and talk about that. We are going to talk about some wrestling news. We're going to talk about Raw, AEW, etc. Do a preview of the Survivor Series, and then we have Opinion Corner coming up. I also have a funny comparison to make between a political story and something that happened in wrestling nearly 30 years ago. So, yeah, that's today's show. If you want to get involved, Headlocks and Headphones is where to find us on Facebook. You can obviously find us on YouTube, Headlocks and Headphones, and you can find us on Twitter if you're smart enough to look for the details over there. Now, coming up is the wrestling news, but there is one piece of wrestling news. I've been doing this a little bit past couple of weeks. There's one piece of wrestling news we're going to leave for the opinion corner because if true, it pisses me off a lot. If untrue, it still pisses me off a lot. And let's figure out what that is when we get to the opinion corner. But for now, wrestling news. So, the wrestling news section every week. I always say it's not just wrestling news as in like who's signing for who, but sometimes it's also kind of covering the interviews that have been happening in the wrestling world. This week, for me, one of the better interviews I've seen would actually involve The Undertaker and his appearance on Hot Ones, which is basically a chicken wing eating contest. But not a contest as in like see who gets the most. It's about each step being more spicy than the last. And I will honestly say, if you go out of your way to check out the Undertaker Hot Wings episode, I'll put the link up on the screen just now. It's very good and very honest. And the guy doing the interview actually asks him a question the Undertaker says he's never been asked before. Considering the hundreds of interviews the Undertaker has done, that's quite an interesting point. Now, talking of interesting points, he did discuss the fact that in the 90s, he had to do Regis and Kathy Lee, which is the show that came before Regis and Kelly and all those other shows that came later as the cast kind of changed. But he would have to appear as the proper Undertaker, the original Undertaker, where he couldn't really speak, and these people would be mocking wrestling, and he was just having to kind of sit there and grunt, and he described it as the most incredibly dull and painful experience of his career. And considering that some of the injuries he's had, and considering he's faced Great Khali, he knows pain and he knows dull. But go out of your way. The Hot Wings, obviously, when the show's finished, don't go now. But when the show's finished, go check out the Hot Wings episode, Hot Ones episode, featuring The Undertaker. He's actually using the name The Undertaker. One of the things that's quite interesting as well is, so WWE performers have been told they're not allowed to use Cameo, etc. But WWE do, like I've been discussing in recent weeks, potentially have a relationship with these companies now. And The Undertaker does have a Cameo. I will put the link for the Cameo up on the video as well. He's only doing it for a certain amount of time, but he's doing 30 videos, and the problem is they are $1,000 each. I don't know about you, but $1,000 is a little bit out of my price range. But for anybody who does get a message from The Undertaker, good luck to you. Hope you enjoy it. The link is up on the video just now for you to go and check out if you want to. Be kind of cool to receive a video message from an Undertaker. I've used Cameo and stuff before and got stuff from Road Warrior Animal, who's sadly no longer with us, Vince Russo. Who else did I get? Shayna Baszler, some people from Star Trek. I also had Zordon from the Power Rangers actually tell producer Zoe Styles that she was going to the wrestling, which is a funny story because she watched the video of him saying, "You're going to see the wrestling. This is from Martin and your son." And she still didn't get it. Zoe Styles, the person who thought that Mrs. Brown was actually a woman, the person who thought that Chewing the Fat was 30 years old and still game was not about prosthetics and makeup. Yes, that person. Anyway, she also thought, have you ever seen Uncle Roger? If you haven't seen Uncle Roger, this is another link I have to put up. This is Uncle Roger's Facebook link on the video just now. Uncle Roger is a comedian who does videos where he reviews people cooking Asian dishes. Very, very funny guy. And she thought he was funny as well. And then at one point he kind of suddenly burst into a proper English sounding accent, not the Asian sounding accent that he has. And I could tell she was thinking, oh, he's got a really good English accent, rather than realizing, like Omid Jalili, that's his real accent. Anyway, not that I'm wanting to mock my producer Zoe Styles, but she has had a few weeks off, so I feel like she is going to get mocked quite a little bit more. Now let's move on to something a bit more serious, rather than joking, taking the mickey out of my producer. Let's take the mickey out of our sponsor. No, let's not do that. We'll maybe mock our sponsors later on. Our sponsors are at CWF Scotland on Twitter, by the way, if you want to know who they are. A wrestling company being set up in 2021. Their boss is a bit of a dick. But that's not news, so why are we talking about it here? Okay, so JTG spoke with Chris Van Vliet, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, talking about his relationship and friendship with Shad Gaspard, Crime Time. For me, I loved Crime Time. The fact that they never got back, okay, it would have been a third time, but the fact that they never got back to WWE when there was so much potential there, and I know JTG has been a little bit bitter towards WWE, but there's some interesting things he said in his interview about WWE's Warrior Award. Now, he definitely should. I don't know what's a bigger heroic act than putting his life on the line for his son, but honestly, he would have done it if it was another child. If it was me, he probably would have done the exact same thing. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, Shad Gaspard lost his life, and the reason he lost his life was because he dove into the sea to try and save his son. And quite frankly, when I heard it, it took me 5 minutes to kind of process the fact that he literally gave his life to save his son, which is incredible. And I think we all hope we would do the same thing. I can't swim. It would be pointless me jumping in to save. I probably still would, on the off chance that I could do something. So to know that he tried and he gave his life in doing so, to hear that he is being considered, people want him to be considered for the Warrior Award. Definitely somebody who should get it if they have it, and particularly this year at WrestleMania, the Hall of Fame and those awards are going to be really important because hopefully, stemming from this COVID crisis, post WrestleMania, the plan is that's when fans are going to be allowed back into shows. So it would be around about a year without fans. I think if they're going to do that, the Hall of Fame needs to be kept until we can have fans in the building so that Shad Gaspard can kind of get that respect he deserves. 20,000 people chanting his name would at least put a smile on his face if he was sitting looking down on us. Now, Miz and Maurice have recently spoken with Barstool Sports on KFC Radio. And the Miz spoke about the reason for moving away from Los Angeles initially was there was multiple attempted break-ins at their home, and they moved to Texas for a year. Now this came to light because Miz being asked what he would do if a zombie apocalypse were to happen. Now in answering the question, Miz revealed the situation and said he also talked about why he's more cautious now. He said, "No, I'm ready to fight. Are you kidding me? I've got guns. I've got a shotgun and I've got a 9mm. I was never a gun guy until I lived in Los Angeles, like in Hollywood, and I have a family, right? And I would leave, and they would always tell you, don't ever tell anyone where you live, or not where you live, but that you're leaving. Don't put it on Instagram. This is live. But I'm on a live television show. What do you want me to do?" And I'll never forget, I put cameras all over my house, and my house had an attempted break-in, and it happened in numerous weeks. So I took my wife. I was like, look, you're getting a gun. We're going to take you. We're going to learn how to shoot and figure out the best possible way to defend ourselves. To me, this is just incredible. I mean, he's now moved back to California. So obviously, they've been able to put things in place that make them feel safe, and that's great. To me, it seems insane that you would need to have a gun to protect your family. There's something just not right about that. And I respect his right to do so, obviously, because I mean I can't imagine what it would be like to feel that you had to do that. Guns are illegal here in Scotland without a license, and certainly households don't have guns just for no reason. So it's alarming to see that it's almost kind of the norm in America because you need to do this to protect yourself, which is just this isn't news, but that scares the hell out of me. And let's ignore the political aspect of the guns and look at the idea that if people have the right to guns, then they have the right to use them as well. And I don't know if I could ever fire a gun at somebody. I've fired guns before, but inanimate objects. The idea that I would need to have a gun in my house to protect myself when I'm just happy having a Louisville Slugger. And if you don't know what they are, Google it. I'm happy just having a Louisville Slugger next to the front door, so if anything happens, I know exactly what's going to be happening to the person who tries to do anything. Home runs. That's all that's happening. Now, talking of home runs, Matt Sydal in AEW, he did cock up his first show and slipped off the ropes, and they did a funny little thing on AEW being the elite, where they put some baby oil or something on that corner so that it looked like that may have been the reason why he slipped. Obviously, all just trying to make light of the fact that he made a mistake. But he has put on some great performances since the All Out Casino Battle Royal. And as a result, he is now all elite. I think Matt Sydal is somebody who fits in very much with the AEW mantra. He's also very creative. And if you've never seen it, there's a WWE DVD called High Flyers where he wears a GoPro camera on his chest and you get to see him do a dive. It's incredible to see what he sees and also realize I definitely would never ever do it. Not a hope in hell. Now, two stories coming up about a former WWE employee, one of which is quite funny, and the other is good news. So let's get straight to Renee Paquette. She's starting a podcast, and she promises there will be lots of unfiltered conversation. Now, the artist formerly known as Renee Young said the new podcast will be called Oral Sessions. Right. Now, the first comments on the Instagram announcement were from Chelsea Green, which were pictures of eggplants. Now, if you don't know what the eggplant emoji refers to, then please go look at the Urban Dictionary and see what it means. What's quite interesting here is clearly she's just having a laugh and a joke. This is not anything inappropriate, but there's a lot of people saying that she is being inappropriate. But at the same time, who cares? Things should be fun, and there's a double entendre there. Oral sessions, yeah, there's a lot of people who are going to take it one way, but at the same time, people are sitting down and having a conversation with her, so it does make quite a lot of sense. Now, the one thing that's quite interesting is that we did have a promo on AEW where Jon Moxley just randomly out of the blue said that he has a pregnant wife at home. The announcement has not been made, so when Jon Moxley did so, that was the first time it had ever been mentioned that she was pregnant. Now, apparently, she mistakenly sent an update on the pregnancy to Bayley. So Bayley from WWE knew, but apparently a very small select few people knew so they could keep control of it. But congratulations to her anyway. I'm not saying that's the reason she left WWE, but I'm almost certain that could have played a part if she was pregnant. She would have left around about the time that she found out, if she found out really, really early. I'm just hypothesizing here. I'm not saying for a fact, but certainly if you want to have a lighter workload and go into doing things in your own time, then moving away from WWE when you're pregnant is a very big deal. Now, at the same time, talking about moving away from WWE, Retribution had Mercedes Martinez in the team, and that was a great capture for Retribution. We're talking like it's free agency here, but she's a great person to add in. She's very talented, she can perform, and she's attractive. The problem is that she was almost immediately pulled, and it turns out the reason is that her son is actually got some medical conditions that mean that there is a requirement for her to social distance a little bit more and self-isolate and stuff. So Mercedes Martinez, not punished in any way, despite what some wrestling journalists would tell you. She declared herself on Twitter that the reason that she's not been around is because she's looking after her son. So hopefully the both of them are safe and her family are safe and she's looking after everybody she needs to, because that's more important than some stupid wrestling angle. And Retribution's a stupid wrestling angle. Now we move past stupid wrestling angles. Now last week I gave my opinion on Zelina Vega. You don't have to agree with me, but obviously you're wrong if you don't. But what's quite interesting is that the Screen Actors Guild president Gabriela Carteres says wrestlers deserve certain protections in their line of work, and she will start a dialogue to ensure it happens. Now I know that there is some discussions here in the United Kingdom. I know certain new companies who may sponsor the show have had discussions with bodies about trying to be part of some positive change. So Carteres did issue a statement showing support for Zelina Vega, and this is a statement here. Wrestling is as much about media as it is sports, and we're going to directly engage with members of this profession to help find ways for them to protect themselves. As more people reinvest in unions, and as more working people are harassed by employers who don't want to protect them, SAG is committed to doing what we can to help professional wrestlers secure the protections they deserve. Now, let's look beyond this and look at the political landscape just a little bit. Andrew Yang, the person who's been really politically heavy on WWE about their treatment of performers, is now going to be in a position of power. Very similar level of access to the president that Linda McMahon had to Donald Trump. He's going to have the ability to begin a formal investigation into WWE practices, which could lead to multiple changes to WWE contracts. And this is the part that people need to understand. For a long time, there's several people out there who've been discussing this. For a long time, the independent contractor thing was great. This is how wrestling worked. I believe nowadays there's perhaps the need for a little bit of change. WWE already offers certain things like rehab for anybody who's been under contract and stuff. So the idea that they can't offer insurance or work with the Screen Actors Guild to offer some level of insurance makes absolutely no sense to me. I think at some point WWE have to bite the bullet and allow some form of unionization. If they wait for the government or an outside body to do so, they're going to experience a lot worse situation than they will just doing it themselves. Hopefully, something happens to protect these performers, because at the minute it doesn't look very good at all. Zoe Styles will tell you that being treated badly by an employer is the worst thing in the world. However, if you have the ability to have protection there, that's a double-edged sword, because if you're a union employee, you may not get employed by certain companies. Now, I know in America, WWE in certain states are required, and not just WWE, any wrestling company, any film company, are required to hire union workers in those states, which means if you have a road crew, you still have to hire a road crew in that state from the union, which means that the costs incurred are greater. So the involvement of unions could lead to things that are actually not all that good for WWE. But it may also lead to certain changes in situations. As talent are moving away from having to work so many house shows, they're going to have more free time. WWE are going to find ways to monetize that time. In a way, if the talent is being rewarded for that, then great. If they're not being rewarded for that and WWE is trying to take their share of that cash, then WWE are breaking the rules. That's the clear dimension that's happening here. There should be nothing stopping these talent going out of their way to do outside ventures. But at the same time, like I've been saying, if WWE have a contract with Twitch and you're broadcasting on Twitch, if you want to continue to have your WWE contract, then you will become part of that WWE contract with Twitch. If you decide that you'd rather do the Twitch contract, then it's going to happen where you get released. Otherwise, there's no rules. Imagine if you have a brother and your brother gets to come home at 11 o'clock and you have to come home at 9 o'clock. The rules being different mean you're just going to break them. And the reason WWE have had to make an example out of Zelina Vega, unfortunately, is due to the fact that if they let her away with deliberately doing something she was told not to, in breach of her contract, whether you agree with that element of it or not, she was told not to, she was in breach of contract. It's one of those unfortunate situations. I think Zelina Vega will find a way. She's not going to suffer. She's a very good, talented worker. Now, talking about good, anybody who played WrestleFest on the arcade systems, you'll be of a certain age if you have. But February 26th, 2021, production has been delayed greatly by COVID apparently. But Retromania will be coming out, and it's coming out on Nintendo Switch, Steam, PS4, and Xbox One. But it'll also be compatible with the new Xbox and the new PlayStation. Now, this roster is incredible, considering that you would think, well, there's not a lot of people that are not under contract that would be worth having. Now, let me lead with just the roster that they've signed up through their relationships with talent. Now, there's over 50 match variations, 2 to 8 player online mode, DLCs, entrances, and the entrance animations each come with multiple options for modifying and stuff, so that's kind of cool. But let's look at the roster. So Legion of Doom, Tommy Dreamer, Colt Cabana, Blue Meanie, Stevie Richards, Matt Cardona, Zack Ryder, Brian Myers, you know him as well. It's Zack Ryder's former tag partner Kurt Hawkins, Johnny Retro, John Morrison, Nikita Koloff, Warhouse rather, Austin Idol, Chris Bay, Jeff Cobb, Zack Sabre Jr., and plenty more based on what we've been hearing. So go out of your way. I'm going to pop the link to the trailer up on the screen now. It looks like an old-fashioned game, but hopefully it's going to play very, very well. Big fan of the franchise, and I'm very happy to see what's happening with that. Now, one of the things that I find quite interesting is people always want to know when people's contracts expire. Now, Alexa Bliss did say the details of when her contract expires, and she said that her contract expires in 3.5 years, um, and her fiance is perfectly fine waiting that long to start a family. So it looks like Alexa Bliss is officially saying that this will be her last contract before she starts a family. This doesn't mean she's retiring, because she can disappear, start a family, and then come back, much like I assume Becky Lynch is going to do. Now, one thing that I've been very big on in recent months, and I think I've mentioned it once or twice on the podcast, is how big a fan I am of Davey Boy Smith Jr. Not only has he improved immeasurably, but he's also a great guy. Saved somebody who was away to commit suicide. He's somebody who's going to try and better himself since he was released by WWE. Now, he did a podcast with Sports Illustrated, and he was saying that he has done really well in Japan. He's been working in MLW, and there is some companies interested in him. WWE and AEW would do very well to hire a rejuvenated, talented, excited, and hungry D.H. Smith. I think Davey Boy Smith Jr. coming in with the look that he has and the extra ability he has compared to. I mean, I thought he was talented when he was in WWE, but I've seen some of the stuff he had in Japan and some of the matches he's done in MLW, and he looks a lot better than he was. It's even when he was in the World of Sport and he was teaming McGrado, he still looked worlds apart from the talent that were there. And some of those talents were really, really good. I mean, some of them are insane. Martin Kirby, for example, Sha Samuels, guys who I personally think are some of the greatest workers Britain has produced. And Harry Smith, David Boy Smith, whatever name you want to give him, looked really, really good. So hopefully, as his contract comes to an end, it'll be very interesting to see them head into WWE. I think would be a better fit for him. I think he would just be another guy on the AEW roster. You know, they have Brody Lee, who's a big guy. They have all these big guys. Whereas I think Harry Smith, Davey Boy, he has the chance to go into WWE and be a standout performer, likely going to NXT and having a year in NXT and then coming up to the main roster as certain people leave. Because I think people like Braun Strowman and everybody, they're not going to stick around for too long. Now, talking of not sticking around, WWE are moving from the Amway Center, and apparently the NBA will need the Amway Center for the Orlando Magic beginning the end of December, and the current plans, according to WrestleVotes, is for them to move to Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg, Florida. Now, according to their tweet, these shows would start mid-September and run through WrestleMania, with the potential for fans to still be in attendance at the Royal Rumble in January, perhaps even at Tropicana Field. Beyond that point, it's reported WWE is internally hoping to start having traditional shows with fans beginning the night after WrestleMania. So that means their plan is right now, the working model they have is for fans to return the night after WrestleMania, which, by the way, if that's true, it's going to be the most insane audience ever. But I think before that, they want to try and begin phasing in fans. So it will be very interesting to see what WWE are doing in the next few months. Now, let's look at two stories about AEW before we finish up and get into what we're here to talk about, the wrestling shows as well. Darby Allin commented on winning the TNT title and being called the face of the company, and he said on what it means to be called the face of TNT after winning the title. It means I have to hustle more. It's wow. He actually did it. I can't stop and smell the roses. And how he compares his first match against Cody to their match at Full Gear. Cody handpicked me to go against him for my debut. You couldn't ask for a better debut. I had a lot to prove that night. Coming from the independents, a lot of people told me I didn't belong, that I wouldn't be main event type players. I said hell no to that. I went out swinging against Cody. Then fast forward to our fourth match at Full Gear. In my eyes, it was the biggest match because it was for the TNT Championship. It was a good feeling to step foot in the ring with him and step out as a champion. Personally, I'm not on the Darby Allin train. I'm not as intrigued by this person as everybody else seems to be. I'm not a huge supporter of Darby Allin. He has had some good matches. However, I just think that the hype train is really harming him. Let's let him develop. I'm not against him. I'm not saying he's awful. What I'm saying is I don't think he's as good as the hype is. I think he has the chance to grow, and he will hopefully show me that he can improve. At least that's the hope. Now, the Young Bucks were talking about meeting Shawn Michaels with Wrestling.com, and this is a quote from Matt. It's funny, we befriended Marty Jannetty because we booked him on our independent show, and he told wild war stories, and some really seemed out of the realms of possibility. We were like, there's no way that happened. We would question it even back then. We knew some wrestlers were kind of carny. They would say things, and we would kind of humor them. I remember him calling us and saying, hey, I heard you guys are going to WWE to do extra work. We're like, yeah. He's like, all right, well, I'm going to tell Shawn that you guys are coming, and hopefully he can talk to you guys. And we were rolling our eyes. We didn't believe it. Sure enough, we're sitting in catering, and we see all these big stars. We're kind of starstruck, and then finally we see the guy, Shawn Michaels, our hero. He's sitting at one of the tables with Jesse Hernandez, who's an old school referee, and he's also a promoter in South Carolina, California rather. And we were familiar with Jesse. Jesse sees us, waves us over, and we don't believe it. Why would Jesse wave us over there? And he does it again. Finally, we head over, and Shawn's just sitting there looking up at us, and we're just like, what is this? It's so surreal. He knew our names, and sure enough, Marty came through and called Shawn that morning and said, hey, these kids, look out for them. And he described what we look like, and we sat there. Now, my conversations with wrestlers have all involved this Old Boys Network. And it sounds really bad, the Old Boys Network, but it's just this idea. Someone puts a word in for you, and that kind of greases the wheels and makes things a little bit easier. I think the one thing about HBK is he had this reputation for being a bit of a dick to the boys, but he's always been nice to the fans. So Nick and Matt were talking in that interview about the fact that they met him as kids and he was nice to them, but they didn't expect it based on some of the stories they've heard of Shawn Michaels. Clearly, a much more mellow and mature Shawn Michaels when the Bucks met them as performers. But what's really interesting is Shawn Michaels got them extra money. So Shawn must have liked what they did enough to get them paid more. And if you don't know what the Young Bucks were doing on the WWE show, I'm not going to tell you. You can go out of your way to see what the Young Bucks did on the WWE show. I think you'll be amused. Anyway, that is the wrestling news. But one last story before we go. Fightful Select had former Tough Enough winner Nydia Guinard on. She says she has no plans to wrestle again. She's moved on, she's a mother, and she has no interest in getting banged up again. She added that no companies have reached out to her recently. Now, she noted that she planned on quitting WWE before she was fired back in 2004, but didn't want to breach her contract. She also said she had no bad feelings, she was just ready to move on. She never wrestled in the US again and only took bookings in places she wanted to spend her vacations in. That lasted about a year before she left entirely. There's a talent who, for me, was very, very good and should never have left the business. Nydia is somebody who that storyline she did with Jamie Noble was stupid, but at the same time, it was funny. And that's what wrestling should be. It should be funny. Okay, so this week is going to be a slightly different show in terms of what we talk about wrestling-wise. Now, normally I talk about SmackDown, but we watched it already. I discussed it on last week's show because we were a day late. We were able to catch up on SmackDown. Now, this week, I haven't caught AEW, and I didn't catch NXT, so we're just going to discuss Raw and then move straight into talking about the Survivor Series. Now, for me, this Raw is a mixed bag. I was surprised by some things, but overall, it was a decent show. So let's kind of look at one or two things that stand out from Raw, because I'm not entirely sure where a few things are going, so we're going to have to see. What we saw to open the show, Asuka, Mandy Rose, and Dana Brooke defeated Nia Jax, Shayna Baszler, and Lana. We then saw Lana go through the table again. I don't see how this is going to turn her into a face, but apparently on Saturday there is a Lana documentary which is going to kind of give us a better understanding of her away from the character. I certainly think she's marketable in her look, but she just looks really weird because she just pulls all her hair back like this and gives herself a, well, I've heard it being called a Tory facelift, but I do believe there may be other names for it. Basically, where you make your face look all taut by pulling your hair all back. But she's been put through 9 times now, and I think it's going to continue on. I don't see how putting somebody through a table makes them a babyface. Maybe there's more to this story. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but at the same time, you can't just put somebody through a table and expect it to get them over. But we did see the New Day defeat the Hurt Business, Cedric Alexander and Shelton Benjamin in a Raw Tag Team title match. For me, Cedric Alexander and Shelton Benjamin look really good. I have this problem right now with WWE, which is the tag belts almost seem to just be kind of put on somebody and forgotten about. There's no real competition around them. Just now, there's 2 tag teams on Raw and nothing else. That's not a tag team division. And I think the problem for Raw is having to find ways of building the tag team division. Now, talking of building, there's been quite a few weeks where Retribution have looked weak, where Retribution have lost to various people. And for me, you don't build a team by having them lose every week. You certainly don't have them losing a match to Bobby Lashley at the pay-per-view, Shane Thorne, in several minutes. And he looked awful in that match. But you look at Retribution defeating Keith Lee, Riddle, Braun Strowman, and Sheamus. If you're trying to build these guys for the pay-per-view, then it makes no sense to sacrifice them to Retribution. Retribution actually gained nothing because it was such a fluke win that it's almost like every year at Survivor Series or every year for these bragging rights style pay-per-views, we're going to get this same stupid crap of the dysfunctional team with a captain that wants to be captain and everybody else thinks they should be captain. And it's the same lazy storytelling when instead they could just actually do something a little bit different. Just have people like, why not have the Hurt Business represent Raw? Have the qualifying matches and then Hurt Business just take the spot and do it. That would cause tension between Hurt Business and the locker room. But instead they have to go back to the same old storyline. We did see, of course, Bray Wyatt defeating The Miz, which was very cool. The one thing at the end that I was quite intrigued by was when Alexa Bliss kind of went around the ring barrier, and then there was this playful moment between her and Bray, and as they walked up the ramp, the Fiend appeared on the screen. Kind of this interesting idea that the Fiend is not Bray Wyatt, at least in Bray Wyatt's head, which would probably be a scary place to be. But for me, it was entertaining to watch, even if it does make no logistical sense to have that on screen. It's clearly a pre-tape. But very intrigued by this Alexa Bliss relationship, and certainly the Nikki Cross dimension is one that's not being fully explored yet, but hopefully something that will come. There'll be a little feud there going on. There's a lot of stories on Raw that they almost seem to have a point, but we're not quite there yet. And that's a problem. I think WWE need to start giving us more of the point with some of the stories. And I know on SmackDown they did very well with the Drew McIntyre appearance that had him basically saying he was going to beat Randy Orton on Monday night, and we were going to lead into a match with Drew McIntyre versus Randy Orton. And then for Jay to step up and there to be the main event match between Drew and Jay, it was a great match and made Jay also look good as well, because he had a very competitive match with a WWE champion level performer, which he'd already done with Randy Orton, not Randy Orton, with Roman Reigns. He'd had a very good match, but he hadn't looked like he was quite on his level. He looked stronger against Drew, even though Drew still got a strong win. But let's talk about a couple of things. For Drew McIntyre, he opened the show talking about the fact he was having a title shot And then out came the Miz and Morrison saying, we could cash in tonight. Drew managed to kind of get the better of them. So we kind of reminded people of what the main event was going to be. And then backstage, for some inexplicable reason, Sheamus, who's meant to be a bad guy, who is friends with Drew in real life, they had their tryouts together, decided to give Drew his kilt and his claymore. The claymore apparently is Vince McMahon's. But what's quite interesting here is that he wore it for his entrance, which looks cool, lots of pyro and stuff. The one thing that Zoe said when she saw that entrance was, the second I saw that entrance, I knew Drew was going to win the match. Drew did win the match. We do get Drew McIntyre versus Roman Reigns at Survivor Series, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But why on earth would you give Randy Orton the belt for a couple of weeks to then take it off him? Why not have just left this match in place and then have Randy get it at the next pay-per-view? And you can still do the exact same story. At the previous pay-per-view, Drew could have literally faced off against anybody. And that, for me, is kind of the problem with WWE, because they've done this before where they had somebody as a champion and then they had somebody else win the belt just so that would be the better match at Survivor Series. You can't tell me they didn't know Survivor Series was coming. And this is a problem WWE really need to get around, because eventually they're going to have to step up and actually do something about long-term narrative style storytelling. I know people claim AEW are doing long-term storytelling, but no, they're not. All they're doing is putting their belts on the EVPs. And then the EVPs are doing the same thing. The EVP, Cody Rhodes, did the exact same thing that Randy Orton just had to do. He won the belt, and a couple of weeks had to drop it back because there's a story to tell. Makes no sense. And WWE and AEW are both guilty of that, not picking sides in this. Now, we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about the Survivor Series 2020. Now, I know this is the show review section, but this is the show preview section. This is the 30th anniversary of The Undertaker's appearance at Survivor Series. Now, let's talk a little bit about Survivor Series. So it started in 1987, and it went to become one of the big four: Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and Survivor Series. They were the big four pay-per-views. And then when the WWE introduced the brand split in 2016, it became the competition between Raw and SmackDown. 2019 featured NXT as well, which, by the way, made them look really strong. That roster's now been kind of broken up, and will be broken up a little bit more with the arrival of Rhea Ripley on either Raw or SmackDown in the coming weeks, apparently. NXT will not be involved in this year's event. The star power just isn't there for them. They have Finn Balor, but below that, they have talent, but the star power isn't there yet. They will be. There will be some 5-on-5 matches between Raw and SmackDown. There will be some other matches facing Raw and SmackDown champions. Now, beginning in the 2017, the champions of Raw faced the champions of SmackDown in non-title matches, although it became triple threat matches the year that NXT were involved. So we're going to have lots of interesting matchups, things that we probably wouldn't expect to normally see, which for me is kind of what we wanted with WWF and WCW back in the day. We wanted to see Hulk Hogan or Goldberg versus Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock. That was the match we wanted to see at the peak of the war. And then you had the US title matches you want to see, and the tag team titles as well would have been huge. But what's quite interesting is NXT have had an outbreak, and that's the reason they won't be involved in this year's Survivor Series. I think that's maybe part of it, but it has to be partially down to the fact that there's obviously no way of protecting the main roster after an outbreak in NXT. So they've been pulled from the show, and they don't want anybody to fall ill, particularly none of the main eventers. Now let's look at the matches that are going to be on the show, and we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up, and we're going to try and do some predictions as well. Team Raw: AJ Styles, Keith Lee, Sheamus, Braun Strowman, and Riddle, no longer Matt Riddle, versus Team SmackDown: Kevin Owens, Jey Uso, King Corbin, Seth Rollins, and somebody who will be determined on tonight's SmackDown. For me, I think the Raw team is bigger, better, and they need this win more than SmackDown do. Certainly don't think the SmackDown team is as big and strong. But to have people like Kevin Owens and Seth Rollins sitting in this match, which almost seems throwaway to me, seems like a waste of two top level performers. So yeah, my money there would go to Raw. Team Raw for the women: Nia Jax, Shayna Baszler, Lana and Lacey Evans, and Peyton Royce versus Team SmackDown: Bianca Belair, Ruby Riott, Liv Morgan, and two members who again will likely be determined on tonight's SmackDown. The issue here was it was meant to be involving Dana Brooke and Mandy Rose. Mandy's carrying an injury, so they did an injury angle this week and replaced those two with Lacey Evans and Peyton Royce. I honestly believe that Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler alone could win that match against whatever tag team, whatever girls are put onto Team SmackDown. I think that it makes more sense for Team Raw to get it. The SmackDown women's roster certainly could do with the arrival of Rhea Ripley. If Rhea Ripley was to come in as the fifth member of that team, I would certainly put my money on SmackDown getting it, with Rhea Ripley being the lone survivor. That would be a big push for Rhea Ripley. Now, Bobby Lashley, the Raw United States champion, versus Sami Zayn. My money there has to go on Bobby Lashley, but you never know with WWE. Sometimes they want to throw a curveball at you, but for me, they've been pushing Bobby Lashley in a certain way. It makes more sense for Bobby to win, for Sami Zayn to bitch and moan that the Hurt Business screwed him or whatever. So my money's on Bobby Lashley for that match. The tag team champions, the New Day versus the Street Profits. I'm excited by this one. The fact that they swapped titles a few weeks ago, I was kind of highly amused by, because the look on their face was weird, particularly when Montez Ford actually told Xavier Woods that he named his belt. They interestingly haven't stuck with that name, but you know, it's a funny thing to see. Just one of those throwaway details that they threw in to maybe make themselves chuckle, and it stuck in my head. I think New Day are going to get that one. They're there for the longest. Former world champion in there makes more sense. Particularly based on what I think's coming in the last two matches. Asuka, the Raw Women's Champion, versus Sasha Banks, the SmackDown Women's Champion. My money would have to be on Asuka, right? But I think Sasha Banks, it needs to be built up and could do with this win. But I'm still going to go with an Asuka win. And you know, the name Bayley has not been mentioned for Team SmackDown. I likely think if Rhea Ripley is getting called up, there will be likely Natalya put in there and Rhea Ripley. That would be a good finish for that. However, Sasha Banks versus Asuka, I think Bayley has to be involved and cost Sasha that match, so that Sasha has a reason to again be angry and continue that little storyline. I say little storyline, but that storyline with Bayley. So yeah, my money there is on Asuka, and then we have Drew McIntyre versus Roman Reigns. This one could go either way. I think the story they're giving Roman Reigns of being the head of the table, him losing, is something that would certainly seem like it deflated him. Whereas if you just throw in something there, like Jey Uso being involved, then that could really help Drew McIntyre to win or rather lose, without looking weak. But I think if you're giving Drew the belt so late, you're looking to make the match stronger than it would have been Randy versus Roman. It makes more sense for Drew to walk out of this with the win and have it be as a result of interference from Jey Uso and push that storyline. But with interference planned in the previous match, Asuka versus Sasha Banks, makes me think they're maybe going to change the match order. I think having Bobby Lashley, maybe Team Raw's men's match before Drew versus Roman Reigns would probably be the better option. Likelihood is WWE are going to add some matches. I'm unsure if they've added anything to the pre-show yet. I believe they will at some point, because the pre-show tends to get matches that are exclusive. But yeah, so that's my predictions for WWE Survivor Series 2020. Apart from one thing. 30th anniversary of The Undertaker, and I didn't mention him. I hope to God, based on the interviews he's been doing, that Undertaker isn't going to come in and just have a match. Undertaker isn't going to come in and we're going to lead to a match at WrestleMania. For me, if this is his goodbye, I think if he comes out dressed in his gear, takes it off to reveal that underneath he's actually just a normal guy, that would be beautiful. And if you have that with, Shawn Michaels, Ric Flair, Hulk Hogan, all these guys showing up, former big time Bret Hart, Stone Cold. I mean, there has to be some surprises here. Kane has to be there, certainly. We can't have Paul Bearer for obvious reasons. Mankind, Mick Foley needs to be there. These guys need to be there to say their goodbyes to The Undertaker. Rumors are Undertaker is going to be taking on a training role in NXT, and if you have him as a trainer, uh, based on the conversations I've seen him having, he looks like the kind of person that if he says something, you listen to it. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I did say last week, Savio Vega said he's going to be there. He is friends with him. I know Rikishi's friends with him. Godfather, Ron Simmons, Bradshaw, several others have been friends with Undertaker over the years. So it'll be interesting to see what they have planned. I hope that it isn't basically like 30 minutes of everybody just hugging him. I would love to see. I don't want to go down the route of having a match, but I would love to see maybe King Corbin coming down to just say, do you know what? Screw you guys. The Undertaker's yesterday and should be retired. And then, you could have insults being thrown from Corbin towards Undertaker, and Undertaker gives him a choke slam or a last ride or a tombstone or whatever it is. Does the walk along the ropes, old school style. Does one of those, and then just leaves. Play the music, let him walk out, and he goes out, and the last thing he ever did was beat up King Corbin. Or if it's not King Corbin, it could be, Seth Rollins or somebody. But the last thing I want to see is Undertaker wrestle a proper match. I would certainly hope John Cena makes some form of appearance, probably via video. But it'd be interesting to see who they have planned. There's a lot of things they could do to make this special for the Undertaker. I would love to see Undertaker come out and actually express some genuine feeling out of character as Vince, not as Mr. McMahon. So it's going to be interesting. I'm going to be watching Survivor Series purely to see what they do with the Undertaker. I'm hoping that we get something big. I'm hoping we get something memorable. I'm hoping it's not everybody comes in the ring, Undertaker comes out, and we announce a match at WrestleMania, because that would piss me off. Just a couple of things before we go. So anybody who's politically minded like myself will have seen a story about Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York. One thing that's quite interesting here is I don't know if I just think about wrestling all the time, but Mayor Giuliani, whilst he was doing an interview, within a minute had black stuff streaming down his face. And when I saw the black stuff streaming down his face, the first thing I thought about was the incident with Papa Shango and the Ultimate Warrior back in the 90s. And one of the things that made me laugh was just this thought that, oh my God, the WWE are now scripting Rudy Giuliani's promos, and they've decided to do the Papa Shango angle so he can write himself out of being Donald Trump's lawyer and say that he was possessed all along. That is it. It's the demon coming out of Rudy Giuliani. Although maybe not, because apparently Rudy Giuliani is a bit of a dick. But that's a different story. So, Martin's Opinion Corner. Every time I do this, it's usually so I can have a rant. This week, I'll probably end up ranting a little bit, but there is some news coming out from AEW that's not very favourable and doesn't show them in a very good light. So let's kind of discuss this, and then I can give, hopefully, some pertinent opinions on this. Now, the story is from somebody on Twitter. It is out there. I'm not going to share the name of the person. I'm not going to put up pictures of what they've been saying, but let's just discuss what they've been talking about. Is the fact that when he was hired by AEW, he was told that Cody Rhodes didn't like him. He was told that whenever Cody would show up at the office, he would have to hide in a different room. And the negative comments from himself, from Cody Rhodes himself, and from this employee's direct bosses, who apparently one of which is a WWE Hall of Famer who's 6'5", narrows it down based on who works for WWE. The the overall idea being that Cody didn't like him. There was lots of negative comments, abusive comments, um, basically what in the corporate world would be considered bullying. And for me, with Cody Rhodes, saying that AEW was meant to be a different environment to work in, there's two aspects to take from this. One, it's very easily verifiable if this person actually worked for AEW. Several people have come forward and stated that, yes, he has worked for AEW. It's also very easily identifiable based on the fact that he has direct communication with AEW contracted performers and people employed indirectly by AEW as part of the job that he had. He was refused access to being credited for his work. He was shouted at, mistreated, various other things. And as this stuff was coming out, Cody was tweeting storyline related content, and it just, for me, it seems off that Cody would be unaware of this when people were tagging him in what was being said. The the overriding aspect about AEW was meant to be that it was different to WWE. It wasn't going to be, this tyrant who was bullying people and forcing them to do things and taking credit away from them and creating this negative culture. And what's happened is not shocking, because I was told a few things last year about Cody Rhodes off the record by somebody, and I took them with a pinch of salt for what they were. There were comments by people who'd worked shows with Cody here in the UK and was not happy about how he'd been treated. He was asked if he wanted to be interviewed on a show, and he said he doesn't want to tell anybody about them because there is every chance he could eventually have to work with Cody again. He doesn't want the bullshit that comes with that. For me, this we have to link somewhat to the speaking out movement. There is a fear within people involved in the speaking out movement that when they speak up, they're going to lose their jobs or they're going to lose future jobs. And for me, we're seeing that with a lot of these stories coming out about certain performers in certain positions. And one of the alleged names that has been put forward as being guilty of abuses is Billy Gunn. And it's not the first time that Billy Gunn has been linked with being abusive. There was the famous voicemail he left a female that came back to haunt him when the girl released it to show exactly what he's like. The speaking out movement, I've seen people who spoke out about, I'm not going to mention any names here, that's unfair, but I've seen people speak out about things that have happened to them, and they've been called some horrible things. The person who came forward to mention stuff about Cody Rhodes, the first thing that was said is, and what do you hope to achieve by this? As if somehow telling a story about something that happened to them from their perspective is them trying to achieve something. This person revealed that they've since they left the company, they bought AEW pay-per-views, they watched the show, they are a fan. And that may in part be part of the problem, that he was a smart fan. AEW prides itself on appealing to the fans. Unfortunately, based on the reports coming out, it looks like those smart fans shouldn't also be employees because they get treated like absolute garbage, allegedly. Now, obviously, Cody Rhodes is not Joey Ryan. He's not going to come and sue me because he's a prick. If I say something that Cody disagrees with, Cody's either going to block me or ignore me, because my voice means nothing. The voice of the person on Twitter talking about these stories means nothing. Unfortunately, I have heard from two people separate to this in the previous 12 months about negative stories involving Cody Rhodes. One of which was from a promoter who was telling me about, so Cody was booked for a show. Cody basically decided at the last minute he didn't want to appear, and they came up with an alternative, which was to send somebody else, which is fine. It happens. The problem with this was that Cody kept his money. This could simply be an oversight this could be something very easily remedied, but Cody won't respond to emails from the promoter in question, and obviously he has no ability to go and show up at a venue. He's not in Florida. He also doesn't have the ability to contact Tony Khan because it's not Tony Khan that he paid. There are stories about the attitude issues of Cody Rhodes, and they are small voices. They are lone voices in many cases. There's always the old trope of there's no smoke without fire. When I heard these stories, I kind of brushed them to one side because he comes across so well and he's so vocal about not wanting to create the same environment as WWE. However, what he is doing is also opening himself up to the potential the other way around. And this is not, I'm not going to make claims that defend Cody here. I'm just saying that he opens himself up to somebody making accusations against him where there are none. The problem for Cody here is even if Cody is unaware of how he made his employee feel, or how somebody employed directly or indirectly by AEW was made to feel by his actions, Cody could have easily avoided and changed this. There are small amounts of proof that have been put up that show that Cody reached out because he was angry that somebody who was employed by AEW would mention on their social media that they were employed by AEW. If that were company policy, don't say you're employed by AEW, that's fair enough. There could be a level of, if you're under contract, you can, but if you're a freelancer, don't say you're employed by us, because although we pay you, you're not under contract. You're a freelancer. I get that. That happens. There's certain people in the radio industry who've worked at Radio 1 or BBC Radio for 20 years. They've never told anybody they work for BBC Radio. Although we know they do, they've never mentioned it. It's not on their social media because they're freelancers. They just happen to have been freelancing for a very long time. If that were the policy, then great, understandable. However, other employees of the same rank contributing to the same tasks were allowed to be credited. When this person was credited on an AEW video and people on social media who were friends with this person found out that their name was attached to that video, they were messaging them openly and saying, "Is this you? Congratulations if it is," which, by the way, most people's friends would do. What happened was he then decided, okay, I will publicly just put out a thing saying thank you for the support, and that was it. In doing so, that somehow angered Cody Rhodes. Now, again, if this was policy, have it removed. It's fine. Delete the message, everybody's happy. No. This person was told they had to delete social media in the room in front of a WWE Hall of Famer. This was done, apparently, at the insistence of Cody Rhodes on pay-per-view day, who took time out of his day because he was pissed that somebody said he had contributed to an AEW video. There is proof of this. So while he could maybe deny certain allegations of being responsible for this culture happened around him. And if Cody isn't responsible for this, if the people below him have turned Cody Rhodes into this scapegoat for their attitude problems, then that's still Cody Rhodes' problem, because Cody said that his environment would not be like that. And I've seen countless people talk about how cool it is working under Cody Rhodes. It's tough, there's deadlines, and everybody gets stressed out, but it's live TV usually, and it's a very tough environment to do live TV every week. If these allegations were true in any other corporate environment, the EVP would be removed from their position. I don't see this happening here. Personally, whilst I want to make links to the Speaking Out movement in the sense that the Speaking Out movement is not just about sexual harassment. That's a huge part of it, obviously. But it's also about bullying. It's also about this ingrained culture of treating people like crap or making people prove themselves. I mean, proving yourselves is one thing, but one of the things that has come up is the fact that allegedly Cody Rhodes made statement to the effect that you've put up with so much shit and you've stuck around, so you deserve to be here. This was comments from Cody directly to the person who's made the allegations. This was not comments made and then secondhand information passed down. If these are true, then if you were working for any corporate entity, they would remove you from your position, even if it was just to suspend you. I said when AEW was starting, and I have had conversations with several people, including the boss of CWF, Stuart Murphy, about the fact that the boys running the boys could be good in so many ways, but it can also be exploited. If Cody doesn't like you, you won't get booked. If Cody does like you, you get booked even if you're not good enough. I'm not saying that happens, but the possibility is there. There's also the fact that there's a house of cards here for AEW. If Cody Rhodes leaves, the company will likely survive. The way Cody has been, it makes very little sense for him to go back to WWE, so he'd have to go wrestle in Japan. Not saying he would leave AEW, but if these allegations are true and Tony Khan is responsible for an environment like this, then there is a lot of bullshit that should rightfully come AEW's way. And if people want to excuse this and say, oh, the person's just a disgruntled former employee, that's fine. But those same statements were made about people who came out during the Speaking Out movement. And these people need to be heard. He has proof of conversations with his direct bosses. He has proof that he had credits for his work removed. He also isn't going to say that he was perfect. He did have flaws. He didn't always work as hard as he should have. But when you're in an environment where you get treated like garbage, your head does dip and you don't contribute as much as you should. Even though that's not an excuse for how the allegations portray how he's been treated. So Martin's opinion, before we go too far down this rabbit hole, as far as I'm concerned, AEW need to investigate these allegations fully. The stuff that's already online should be enough to be able to link Cody Rhodes directly to these allegations. If there's a misunderstanding, then there can be an attempt to reach out to this former employee and apologize. However, there have been previous attempts to reach out to this employee by those within the company who've told him he's not even allowed to speak to AEW employees or wrestlers. There is intimidation towards him. There is threats. It's unclear what these threats are, but he's stated that there's been threats and he's not to contact AEW performers. So that doesn't sound like a place that I would want to work. That doesn't sound like the place that's creating this open and warm environment. You just need to look around. There are a lot of people being added to that roster. There is a lot of, not dead weight, but they could trim that roster back. They could lose 15 to 20 people and that roster would still be able to do a 2-hour show every week. The problem for AEW is not about their roster. The problem, if these allegations are true, is that they need to do a full investigation and remove those responsible. If Cody's responsible, then he needs to go. If it's Billy Gunn, if it's other people behind the scenes that are responsible for it, then they need to go. Now, one of the allegations was that Tony Schiavone, and this is a direct quote from what was on Twitter, Tony Schiavone said to this guy, who, again, I'm not going to name, you're full of shit, but you're good at your job. Tony Schiavone has been open on his podcast. If somebody's not good at their job, he just tells them because he's too old. And I agree with him. He's too old for that. Like, there's no point in faking it. When he said to the guy, you're full of shit, maybe he talks too much. Maybe he tells stories he shouldn't. Maybe he's too enthusiastic at times when he shouldn't be. That's no excuse for how he was treated. Tony Schiavone's comments demonstrate that he's aware that this person was capable of the job they were being asked to do. Now, this person was actually involved in dealing with AEW Dark. He was involved with the event center that they were doing before the lockdown. So this isn't a guy that just basically did videos for the website or edited a promo package here or there. He was involved in a large capacity. And the one thing that's quite interesting here, although he was producing segments, he wasn't allowed to be called a producer. If you're doing the work, you should be credited as such. So for all of these attempts by AEW and their fans, and you know who you are, and I know that our sponsor used to be one of these people and has finally woken up to that, AEW are guilty of as many things that mistreat their performers and their employees as WWE. And for those people that say that WWE are in the wrong because they won't let talent work other places, do I need to put the video of Tony Khan saying that people who are AEW employees will not be allowed to work for other companies? Yes, the argument is it's COVID related, but the whole point is the company have decided that their performers cannot work for other companies to protect their show. WWE did the same thing. If one company is bad for doing something, both companies are bad for doing something. And Cody Rhodes can turn around and be open and honest during a podcast and say it was his idea to gimmick the chair that Shawn Spears has got all this flack for. Yes, but your company also decided to bury Shawn Spears for the months since that incident happened. You guys did that. Nobody else. AEW, the new dawn, the revolution, the change in the business. If they were an animal, they're just as sick as WWE. And they don't have the resources of WWE in the long term. And maybe, just maybe, people will wake up to that. So our sponsor has been strangely quiet over the past few weeks. What I will say is that I have actually been receiving some private messages from him, and he has been telling me that some paperwork is being dealt with and there are some behind the scenes issues that are being resolved, but he is working on getting a venue for show 1. And the great news, as soon as we have an announcement for show 1 venue, we will also be able to begin announcing talent for that show. And as a result of that, what the plan is on the show is, as CWF are announcing talent for their shows, the sponsored segment of the CWF sponsored Headlocks and Headphones show is going to become mini interviews with the talent that are being booked for the show. Now, the one thing that CWF has going against it is it's brand new and people don't know who they are. We've established who the owner is, so going forward, as soon as we get the venue announced, we're going to also see talent being announced, and as they're announced, I'm going to try and get access to them through CWF to be guests on Headlocks and Headphones. Now, in spite of that, there's no Stuart Murphy presence in this week's show, thankfully, but he swears that he will be making a return very, very soon, and those comments will hopefully be very short and very sweet.
So, it's come to my attention that Headlocks and Headphones want to use the relationship with CWF to interview any talent that gets advertised for our shows. May I remind Headlocks and Headphones that for the chance to do so, it has to be run by and cleared with not just CWF, but with the talent themselves. Please heed that warning. For everyone else watching, enjoy the show, and please head over to Twitter at CWF Scotland and stay following that page for more information as and when it becomes available.
You know I'm always watching. I'm always here. The thing is, when am I going to strike again?